Oxygen Blast technical seminars are an Intertech production. For instructor-led .NET, Java, and XML courses, visit us at www.intertech.com.
Now, if you want to see a listing of every single different .NET namespace, that is all completely documented inside of the .NET documentation. So let me show that to you. Again, if you haven't worked with .NET 4.0 yet, let me show you a couple of new things here as well. The biggest change as far as the help system goes is that everything is now going to be shown through a web browser. Even if you have a local installation of the help system, it's still going to come through a browser nowadays. That's quite different from the compiled HTML we used to have. So let me just open up my documentation. We'll see a browser will pop up here. And if you look at the actual address, you can see that I'm running off my local machine here. Now, I wanted to show you the part of the help system that documents every single namespace. So let me show you how to navigate to that. We just go to .NET Framework 4. And then right inside of here, you're going to see a link called the Framework Class Library. And here we go. Right? This is the whole enchilada. This will show you all of the different namespaces in the platform. And there's actually more than this as well. But if I were to just kind of go into maybe system.collections, right? Now I'm going to see a bunch of sub namespaces here. So I can see, for example, system.collections.generic. Now I'm going to find all the different types in this particular namespace, such as the very handy list. And then I'll be able to see plenty of code samples. Notice I can pick my language of choice here to see examples of code. I'll see a breakdown of all the members, right? And then typically some good sample code I could just copy to my clipboard. Let's go ahead and see what this one does. Come back to Visual Studio. I'll just paste all that in. Yeah, it just looks like it's processing data inside of a list in various ways. So this is where we really spend our time in the help system, right? This is where we can really dive into all the details of all the types. And thankfully, Visual Studio has built-in support to automatically go to the correct part of the help system. Let me show you that too. Because if you look at this big help system, you might say to yourself, holy cow, where am I ever going to figure out where to look, right? There's just so much stuff. You might say, well, yeah, I know that the name of the class is called list, but that's all I know. How am I going to know where to find it in this huge tree? Well, you don't have to. If you were to go into Visual Studio, we're going to say we want to learn about the console class. I'm just going to put my mouse cursor over the class I'm interested in. When I press the F1 key, it'll automatically go to the correct place in the help system for me. So don't fear the help system. It's the best way to dig in there and see how things are working. Okay, now we're getting close to the end of the talk here, so I thank you already for sticking with me. A few final things that I want to give you, just to kind of give you a nice foundation to build on. Remember we talked about this thing called CIL code, right? The way that it works is that when you are authoring code in your language of choice, let's assume that that's going to be C#. The C# code will be compiled into an assembly. We know what that is. And the assembly contains CIL code. At runtime, the CLR will take that CIL code and map it into native machine code using something called just-in-time compilation. Now we can actually see that SIL code. There is a couple of interesting tools that we can use to kind of dig inside of an assembly and see all the guts. Very helpful from a programmer's point of view. Now, the free .NET SDK, it gives us a tool called ILDASM. That's pretty good, but you only can see the internal data in terms of SIL code. And SIL code is probably not what most programmers want to look at. There's another tool out there which is a free tool called Reflector. And that tool is really great because you can pick which language you want to see the actual SIL code presented as. So let me go do that real quick here. Let me go back to Visual Studio. I just got to remember where I saved my program. So we got to go here. So let's open this up in Windows Explorer. Okay, so there is the executable, which is now, as you recall, I processed these dinosaurs apparently. Well, let me open up these tools and show you how this looks. And first I'll start with ILDASM. That tool can be started from a Visual Studio command prompt. And then I can just go ahead and drag this assembly on top of ILDASM. Right? So remember, what this tool is doing is it gives us a low-level examination of what became of the original C# code. So if I were to go to the main method and hit the Enter key, I'm actually going to be able to look at that SIL code, right? Loading strings, no ops, don't worry about that. Making calls on objects. Notice how in terms of SIL code, everything's the fully qualified name, right? Got some exception handling here. You know, this is the actual stuff that the CLR is going to be processing, right? When we're writing code over here in C# land, now the compiler will do the dirty work to generate the SIL code for us. And if I were to take this same body of code and write it in Visual Basic, you know, the high-level code would look different, but the SIL code would be more or less the same. You know, any .NET compiler can kind of tweak how the SIL code is generated, but it's working on the same set of opcodes. Now, there's a better tool, I would say, than ILDASM. That's called Reflector. If you were to just do a free, if you were to do a Google search on a Reflector, you'll find the actual page for this. Now, at first glance, it might look like just another object browser. So let me just put my assembly in here. So I can see there's the main method again. But here's where it becomes much more interesting. Look at this drop-down list. I can actually pick which language I want to see the compiled code as. And this is wonderful. You know, if you ever have a question like, wow, I just don't understand why this method behaves the way that it does. Well, you could load up the assembly in Reflector, pick your language of choice, then when you hit the space key, it's going to go ahead and take the original SIL code and then map it into your language of choice, right? So that looks pretty much like what we see back in Visual Studio. But I could also see the underlying SIL code. I could see it in F#. I could see it in Delphi. So if you didn't know about Reflector, hopefully this alone is worth the time that you spent listening to my talk. Again, just do a Google search on Reflector.
For more free learning resources and to see the latest lineup of our instructor-led .NET, Java, and XML courses, visit us at www.intertech.com.